This is The Other 51. I'm Brian, and this week my guest is Dr. Catherine Pearlman, author of the new book, First Phone, A Child's Guide to Digital Responsibility, Safety, and Etiquette. My guest this week is a social worker and an author of two books, most recently the very excellent book, First Phone, A Child's Guide to Digital Responsibility, Safety, and Etiquette. I was very excited to read it because I realized that I'm already doing all the things that she advocates, or most of them, so thumbs up to me. Dr. Catherine Pearlman, welcome to The Other 51.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, congratulations on book number 2. Very cool to have that out. How's the reception been, and what's it been like having this book out in the world now?
Actually, it's out in a month from now, so you got an early copy.
Gotcha.
I'm just getting a little bit of feedback from like early readers, and it's been great. I mean, everything I'm hearing is thank you. We need this. So I'm hoping it's helpful.
Right. So where did the idea for the book come from? And the idea is great. It's a guide for teenagers, tweens and parents as they kind of navigate cell phone, when to get a cell phone, how to use a cell phone and all of that. But where did this I'm going to write a book about this for you? How did that come about?
So a couple of things happen at once. One is I've noticed that even like conscientious parents are struggling about managing their kids' access to information, because even if in your household you have rules and they don't have cell phones and they don't have iPads and you have protections in place, they're on the bus with some kid who's got a phone, who's the fourth kid, and they're not watching anything, and your kid is Googling whatever they want on that phone. Kids are signing up for social media without their parents even knowing. So I started noticing this happening. And then the pandemic happened, where kids who we carefully manage their screen time are now mandated for school to be on their computers. And even though they're back in the classrooms, many of them are still doing half of their work on the computer.
Right.
And then for socializing, they're on the computers and apps and all of that. So kids were basically on their computers all day, every day. And I just felt like there is no way for a parent to be able to protect those kids. And we need to have kids protect themselves. We need to give them the information to make smart and careful choices for themselves. Mm-hmm. Therefore, they need a book for themselves so they can learn. And that also helps the parents so that they don't have to feel this pressure of, I have no idea even where to start.
Right. It's funny, I hear this around academia, I hear this around the classroom, I hear this at school board meetings, and it's very much a tough nut to crack, the whole phones for kids thing, because, like you said, especially in the pandemic, our daughter used her phone for socializing. Like that was an important part of it. And so balancing that is so tricky. So I think this is a very useful book, I think, for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah,
so
I hope so.
Let's go back a little bit. So you've written 2 books, you've written articles and blog posts everywhere. And you're also a social worker. So how did you kind of come to this kind of dual career of writer/social worker?
So about 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to start a private practice where I went into people's homes and helped them with parenting issues. And I took an ad out in the local paper. It was, the size of a business card. And it was like $250 for a week. And I was thinking to myself, like, that is not sustainable. Like, I cannot pay for that. Meanwhile, I'm looking through the paper and there are all these people writing articles. And I'm thinking, well, I could write parenting articles and then get the advertising for free. At the end, they say, Catherine Pearlman, family coach, whatever. So I started writing. And as you know, my husband is a journalist. So I live basically with my writing coach. And I just started writing like Dear Family Coach columns and, just parenting columns in general at a very hyper local level, and worked on that for a bunch of years. And then little by little, I was broadening where I was writing, what I was writing about. For years, I fantasized about having a syndicated column, and I pitched and pitched and pitched. And I finally did get a syndicated column for a couple of years. And while that was only in maybe 5 or 6 papers around the country, it forced me to write 2 columns every single week for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that alone just really taught me so much about writing, how to get it done quickly, efficiently, and to find my voice as a writer, basically. So now I used to send everything through my husband, like, read this before I put it out. I'm not sure. I didn't even know about like where I should do commas. didn't know what a lead was. I mean, I just really had to learn everything. And now he's like, you don't send me anything anymore. And I'm like, I'm good. I can do this now. And so the first book kind of came out of all of my work in homes with clients. Like that was just basically everything I was telling them for the first, couple of meetings I was meeting with them, I put in the book. And then, the second book kind of grew out of that.
Okay. So that 2-column, that syndication, the multiple columns in a week, looking back on that, what are some of the biggest lessons you learned about writing that you carry with you today from that experience? Because that is, for people who have not done that, that is not an easy thing to be cranking out that type of stuff on the regular.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like I would blink and I would be the next week again. And I was like, you think you have 5 days to go. And it was like, oh my gosh, I have to write my column again already. For me, it was really about efficiency. Okay. In the beginning, those columns would take all day. And then I would push it off. And then I was like, no, I really need to write my column. And it also, those were 600-word columns, and they were 2 Dear Family Coach questions. So there were 2 parenting questions. So I had 250 words maybe for each question. And, I want to give actual advice that's going to help parents. So it really taught me about using the right words, picking my points very carefully. I'm a very practical writer in general, so I'm not very flowery. So it was my kind of writing, but I really learned to think about every word very carefully. But it was very funny because then when I wrote my first book, they're like, you need to do 60,000 words. And I'm thinking, that's not possible. I only write 600 at a time. Like, so I was even counting, like, my acknowledgements are very long, like I was like, how am I going to get to 60,000? And it's funny, in the end, it ended up being so freeing and wonderful to be able to like tell a story, expand on a point. I ended up really liking it, but in the beginning I was very frightened. It was a very different kind of writing.
I was going to ask you about that different type of writing, because 600-word column, especially the way you have it, it's like you're in, you're out, boom, make your point, and you're gone. And then a book, it kind of has to be that longer. So it sounds like it was an adjustment. How did you kind of work through that that shift from quick to expansive?
I think knowing that I needed to fill a book of words, it kind of allowed me to go off the rails a little bit. And you could always cut back later, but just, I have a good story that would point this out really well, or I could define a point here, or I could bring in a little research here. Like I felt like I had fun ways of bulking it up that felt like a relief in a way to kind of put that all in there. So I found various ways of doing it, and it was all really to show a point for whatever it was I was saying. So maybe I said the point quickly, but now I need to expand on the point and show readers exactly how you could implement this point and how it's supported by research and that kind of thing. So in the end, it ended up being great. And also I thought of the book as chapters. I didn't think of a whole book and thinking, okay, how am I going to do this? I really thought of, I had an outline. Today I'm working on this chapter, and just kind of broke things down into smaller pieces.
And that book is Ignore It. I'll link to that in show notes for this episode too. And that was a great book. And I love that it seems like your books are well timed to my own daughter's life. Totally luckily, because she was more toddler age when Ignore It came out, and now she's a tween with this new book. And thinking on this new book, it's written both for kids and there's a section in the back for adults, but it's mostly for teenagers and kids. How was that to write for that different audience? Was it how mindful did you have to be, and how did you kind of shift the writing for that?
So I love kids in my work. I've been working with kids for 25 years. So I feel like I speak the language to kids in general in real life. So I think in a sense that was pretty easy. I also think because I'm not a journalist and I'm not trained as a writer per se, I have a very practical, simple way of writing. I'm not, a novelist or, writing memoirs or anything like that. So for me, making that shift, actually, I found my sweet spot. I was like, okay, actually, this is a great kind of writing for me, because I felt like I could speak to the kids. And in the book, I have 5 composite kids that, represent real kids I know. And I tried to speak in their voice so that it would work for kids. And I've gotten a lot of feedback that was like, the voices felt very authentic to kids. So I feel like in a way I stumbled upon something that's like maybe the most natural kind of writing for me.
I wanted to ask you about that, the 5 kids. So it's kind of like composites, and you introduce them right at the beginning of the book. And it's very interesting because they all have like the different needs for a phone, or different things that they use their phone for. And I'm just wondering, where did that idea for that, for lack of a better word, that device that you're using throughout the book, where did that idea come from?
So I was thinking kids don't want to hear from parents, and
Mm-hmm.
I might be great at talking to kids, but again, I'm still an adult and I really wanted kids to speak to kids. But I also needed to be an authority and be able to give the points as an adult, but then have kids reinforce them. And so that's kind of where it came from in order to help kids hear the points of view. It's like one thing for an adult or a parent to say, don't jump in the pool with your phone. It's another for a kid to say, no, seriously, check your pockets because I've done it twice, which has actually happened to my nephew and my son, two people. Yeah.
And so how did you go about kind of creating these composites? Like how did they, so this, it's great as an idea. So in practice, what did you do to kind of create these composites and kind of build that part of the book?
So I started with actual kids I know, just temperament, personality, likes, dislikes, that sort of thing, not necessarily their real life problems or their family situation, just sort of in my head, an idea of a kid that just kind of kept them authentic throughout. And then it was really important for me for kids to be able to read this book and find commonalities in their real life, whether it's their family situation, whether it's their health, whether it's their social situation, ethnicity. I really wanted to tick off many, many boxes. So once I kind of had an idea of who these kids were personality wise, then I tried to diversify them in every way possible so that kids could say, oh yeah, my parents are divorced, or oh yes, I'm dyslexic, or yeah, and could relate to these kids on some level.
And when you talk to kids for research for this book, or kind of in your work and in doing this book, how do they feel about phones? What do they feel about it? Because I know that it's very easy as parents to be like, blah blah blah, we used to go outside in the summer and now they're just on their phones and TikTok, and be the old people on the lawn. How are kids feeling about phones? Like, what are you finding from them?
I mean, this is their reality. I mean, the truth is that long before kids get phones, they're on their iPads. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most 1 year olds have held an iPad or a phone in their hands to watch a show, to tap on a game, to scribble some art. So it's not like, they get the phone and it's all of a sudden like this big transition. They've been exposed. This is their everyday normal life. So, I mean, I think they're wanting parents to kind of realize they can be responsible and that they can make good choices, and that this isn't like a big thing for them to get a phone. They've already had the access. They're already
Right.
texting their friends on Discord on their computers for school. I mean, they're already doing the things. I think for a while there was a big push for kids to wait to get a phone until they were in 8th grade or till they were 13. And the most kids are getting between 8 and 11, truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
at this point. And I actually think that's a good idea because that's
Okay.
a great age for parents to still have a very good hand in the learning, and the continued education. By the time they're 13, 14, you're really out of their intimate daily life. They're just not sharing stuff the way they would. They don't want you in their phones. Whereas a 10, 11-year-old doesn't care if you're in their phone. They're like, oh, I shouldn't have sent that text. Okay, that's a good tip, mom, dad. But
Yeah.
14-year-old is like, get off my phone. So I actually think that kids are wanting them earlier because that's what all their friends have, and that's the way they communicate. And when you don't have a phone, it's almost like, I remember we didn't give my son a video game system because that's just not, we didn't want him in front of it all the time, but all his friends were doing it and that's all they talked about. He was
Right.
sort of on the outs about it. And so kids
Yeah.
that are, their parents are waiting, that's sort of a social stigma. So I think that they're ready for their phones and they're ready for their parents to sort of get on board. And I think parents should get them a little bit earlier so they can work on, teaching them and instructing.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really appreciate about all of your writing, but especially I found it in this book, is it's real worldedness in a way that they're gonna have phones, like they're gonna be on social media, And I agree. Like a lot of it is their friends are there, so that you don't want their kids are going to be you don't want a kid left out, and not in a just left out. They don't have the fancy thing, but they can't talk to their kids. They have nothing
Yeah.
in common, or kind of those common experiences. And so I do like the way you write it is very useful for me, because, and I think for a lot of people, because it kind of acknowledges, look, it's not a don't get them a phone. This is a great teaching opportunity, or this is how they do it. And they're good. I'm one of my arguments is always, I'm going on here, I'm sorry, but it's like they're gonna use a phone in their life. Like this is not something that's go away. So it's about teaching the responsibility and how to use it and ways to do it, and in a way that's kind of acknowledges it, rather than like this wannabe world where there are no phones or kids aren't doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
So what was the kind of overall research and writing process like for this book, both in terms of the work you did and how you wrote it? Like, what was it like a sit down and crank it out mode? Is it over a number of years? What was that process like?
No, I was literally in the heart of the early pandemic when we were all stuck at home, and I had been watching. I'm a professor, so I have the summers off. So it was in the summer, and I'm watching like a lot of television. I'm just like laying around feeling sorry for myself, and just starting to feel like I need to do something. I need to work. And this idea had been brewing about kids and their technology and their phones. And so I just said, let me just see what's out there for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one book, and it's for girls. It's by American Girl, and it's not a bad book, but it's just for girls, and it's all over the place and less instructive. And I really said that this doesn't exist. So I did a little research on, sort of the market, what's out there, what exists. And then I got to working on a proposal. And for me, a book proposal is really important. Like that's not just so I can get a book deal, but it really, is this a book? Do I have enough content? What's going to go in there? Who's the market? Does it exist? Like, so all the things that go into the proposal were really important. So I had nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so I sat at home and, really put my head down and was just said the first goal is just to do the proposal, and then in the proposal to write 2 chapters.
Okay.
So I had to figure out the kids. I had to get all of that going. And think through a lot of things. And then I was lucky enough to get the book deal still during the pandemic, and then wrote the book, same thing during the pandemic at home. And, I write at night.
Okay.
I dilly-dally all day, and then, sit down when it's quiet to write at night. And that really works for me. And luckily the kids are teenagers. They can wake up in the morning, feed themselves, and get themselves to school and whatever. So that was sort of the routine, and just kind of wrote it chapter by chapter.
What's in that? You said you had a couple sample chapters. What else is in that book proposal?
So who am I? So who am I to tell the story, and why am I the right person? And what are my credentials and qualifications? What are the competing books? So they like to see that there are some books that are similar, so it looks like there's a market, but nothing that's exactly right, so that your book is still important. So I did a little bit of that. How am I going to sell the book? So, the publisher is going to do some PR, but it's really going to be on you to get this book out and to publicize it. So what am I going to do? What are my connections? Where have I been, and all of that? And then it is an outline, chapter for chapter. So it's like, what's the title of the chapter? And then a paragraph on what would be in the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of hard thinking. That's where you really, people don't want to do the proposal, but to me, that's so vital. Then when you actually get to writing the book, you've already done so much work that you're really ready to go. So that's the majority of what's in the proposal. And I share my proposal with anybody who's looking to write a book. I always share it. There's no like trade secrets. I figure I learned it, I share it with anybody who's interested.
Right. How important, and along with just making it easy, how important, or how was it a challenge to kind of crack that structure of the book, the kind of chapter by chapter? Did it come naturally as you kind of research it? How did that all work out?
Yeah, I mean, I keep a lot of notes. So maybe I see a news article about something, like in the book, I mentioned this woman who was in the gym, and she took a picture of a heavy woman naked in the gym. And she said, if I have to see see this, you have to see it. And she reposted the picture. And I was like, yes, this is something that kids need to think about. They don't think about sexting in terms of having naked pictures of young underage children on their phone. Like that is actually illegal. So
Right.
I just kind of made a note of that. And so I usually have, I use notes on my computer for everything, and it's also on my phone. So I kind of just keep throwing things in there, and I'm like, okay, that's actually a chapter. This is a really important point. This I need. I knew self-care was really important because there's so much research out now about how our phones are affecting our kids' mental health. And so
Yeah.
that was really important, especially being a social worker, that was in there. So there were some things that were like 100% in there. And then other things as I was writing, I was like, it would be really helpful to do this other thing. And I hadn't really worked out in the beginning either how I was going to speak to parents. So in the beginning, I had a section at the end of every chapter. And my editor said, I really just want the book to be for kids. Maybe we'll put that all at the end. And that actually worked out better, I thought. So, some things you kind of fix on the fly, and a lot of things kind of fell into place as I would do research and just kind of chuck something in a box and then go back to it.
Yeah, I love the little note in the beginning of the parent section. It's like, okay, kids, now physically hand this book to you. Time to physically hand this book to your parents. I love that acknowledgement of it.
Yeah.
So, did anything? This is such a cliche question to ask on a book author, but I do love it. So I apologize for that. But is there anything that you were finding as you were talking to the kids, as you were writing the book, that kind of surprised you?
I think it's really more parents.
Okay.
That surprised me, because I think I didn't realize how many parents want this book. Like,
Okay.
wish they had it when their kids were younger, are desperate for help in managing their kids' tech. Because, truthfully, our kids are just so way ahead of us. So, like, there's just no way we know how to do all the things. Like, I'm 50 and already my kids are like, Mom, give me the remote. And it's like, I'm actually good at this stuff, but they're better. They know apps, they know how to do settings, they know how to do all these things. And I think parents feel out of their depth. So I think in a way it was the parents that surprised me when I would speak to them. And then I always ask parents, did anything ever happen with your kids? Did they get caught on porn? Did you realize they were seeing something on YouTube? Had they signed up for a social media? And it was always yes. Fill in the blank, whatever the problem was. But this is a universal problem. And I think I hadn't realized that it was so significant.
So how do you balance out in this book? And you did a wonderful job of it, I thought, but how did you balance out as you're thinking about it, writing a book about, using phones, using all this technology, but not making it sound so dated that like in 2 years, somebody, the MySpace problem, right? Where somebody looks at this and being like, this is useless now because da, 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 da. So how did you kind of balance the specifics of what kids are doing with kind of those more bigger universal themes?
I have to say I am a little bit worried about that. And then the book is also being translated into other languages. And I'm thinking, like, how does that play out? Like, does this all make sense in another language? So I am a little concerned about that, but I did overall try to come up with concepts. So like the concept of social media, it doesn't really matter which social media you're on. This is what a social media is. They all have commenting, liking, and sharing. And whether it's pictures, videos, voice, it's something new will come. So I tried to work more in concepts, but I'm sure I will look back in 5 years and like cringe at some of the references. And also, like I talk about athletes or whatever. And also my kids would be like, nobody knows who you're talking about. And I'd be like, okay, give me somebody you follow, or who's hot right now. So I think some things will be outdated, but I do hope that for the most part, like a scam is always going to come up. Like the scam may look differently, but the idea that we have to be mindful of scams, that's always going to be a thing. And how we make our passwords is always going to be a thing.
Right. And it would just open you up for a second edition or an updated edition of the book.
Yeah, exactly.
What is, I don't want to say the prime takeaway because people should read the whole book and there are a lot of them, but what are some of the key things that you want kids and parents to kind of come away from this book feeling about the relationship that kids have with their phones?
So I think number one is like, this isn't like you get this book and you've learned everything and you're good to go. Like digital education is a lifetime for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
The new things come out, new scams come out, new updates happen, and we all have to continually learn. And so I hope that kids and parents sort of take that away and foster that kind of communication among themselves. I really hope the idea of kindness in a digital world comes through, because I think, I try to teach kids to have their first instinct be, hold on a second, let me just see if I could have reread that, or if I could say this in another way. Because I think, it's just so easy to mindlessly be behind a screen and behind a screen name even, and type something nasty and not realize that there's someone on the other end. We've all had that, who's getting their feelings hurt. So I think that to be kind to each other, and to, continue for a lifetime. And also, you will make mistakes. I had a whole chapter on this, and this is really important to like hone in on, because we all make mistakes. And I try and tell parents, like, imagine you're at work and you make a mistake, as people do, and your boss is like berating you at the team meeting and sends an email out to the company and takes away your privileges, like all these things. It's horrifying, but it's part of life. And so I think if we get a little nutsy with our kids when they make a mistake, then they stop telling us stuff. Right. And I really want parents to continue with open communication. So you really got to not freak out, parents, and you have to just say, okay, that happens. Now what can we do? How do we fix it? How do we learn from it, and not be punitive?
So I think the biggest thing I took away was the sleep part and not having phones in the room. Why is that so important for you?
Oh my gosh, this is like my number one rule. Basically, what we know, the research is still sort of coming out about how phones are impacting our lives. But what we know for sure for teenagers is that they're not getting enough sleep. And so many of them are sleeping with their phones. It depends on the research study, but it's like somewhere between like 60 and 80% of kids sleep with their phones in their room, and like 30% of them with their phones on their pillows. So what happens all night long? Their sleep is interrupted. They're getting notifications. They're texting at 1, 2, 3 in the morning. I always say, I promise nothing good is happening at 3 in the morning with your kid on their phone, and they're not sleeping. So the side effect of not getting enough sleep is anxiety, depression, less attentiveness, lower memory, worse grades in school, lower coping. We know the side effects of teens not getting enough sleep. And also we know that the more hours people spend on screens, no matter what they're doing, the more depression and anxiety that they have. So all of those things combined, it's like kids really need this social break. They need to have uninterrupted sleep, and they need to just have a break from, whatever's happening in the middle of the night on their phone. So that is like a number one rule. And parents always like, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, if it's a non-negotiable, your kids will fight you for a couple of days, and then that's it. They actually kind of like it because they get a break.
Right. So I ask everybody I have on the podcast this, so I'll ask you, what's the best thing you've read lately?
Oh, the best thing I read lately. I'm like looking over on my table. Oh, well, this wasn't super lately, but the book by Patrick Radden O'Keefe about the opioid addiction and the Sackler family.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Obsessed with that book. I talked about it with everybody I know, because I just don't think we understand how we got here. So I loved that. Yeah. And the other book I would say is Hidden Valley Road, about a family where I think they had 12 kids and 6 of them are schizophrenic.
Oh, really?
And it's fascinating, and it was so well done.
Is it a nonfiction?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Cool. Well, I'll have links to that in the show notes. To those in the show notes, I'll have a link to your book so people can pick it up. When is it out officially?
July 26th.
July 26th. So July 26th, yeah. You can just about a month from now as this comes out. So you'll be able to pick it up then. And looking forward to the second edition when you update it with the new social media and all the other good stuff. But Catherine, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to The Other 51. Show notes for this and all of our episodes can be found at sportsmediaguide.com by clicking on the Other 51 tab. If you like the show, please consider giving it a rating and a review, either at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help people find the show. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.